I started to feel like I had something I wanted to paint about. For a long time, I just felt like, oh, I'm making images for my portfolio, just something that looks good to go in the portfolio and get some work or whatever. And but when I started coming up with these cosmic perspective ideas, that was really a point where I was like, oh, I've got something I want to talk about now. I've got something I want to paint about, and now I've got the drive to create something that isn't just something pretty to look at, but has some meaning to me at least.
Welcome to the Bold Brush Show, where we believe that fortune favors the bold. Brush. My name is Laura Oringo-Bear, and I'm your host. For those of you who are new to the podcast, we are a podcast that covers art marketing techniques and all sorts of business tips, specifically to help artists learn to better sell their work. We interview artists at all stages of their careers, as well as others who are in careers tied to the art world in order to hear their advice and insights. On today's episode, we sat down with Rob Rey, a fine artist who creates narrative scenes with allegorical figures representing aspects of science and space. He aims to help people feel a meaningful connection to the universe and natural world through his Cosmic Perspective series, which explores concepts like being made of stardust. Rob discusses his artistic journey from being influenced by Joseph Campbell and Carl Sagan to developing his unique painting process and style. He shares the challenges of transitioning to a full-time art career, emphasizing the importance of living frugally and diversifying income streams. Rob also provides advice for aspiring artists, encouraging them to paint what they love, be patient as they build their careers, and to allow themselves to follow their curiosity. Rob's work and story remind us of the profound ways in which science, nature, and creativity can intertwine to foster a profound sense of belonging in the cosmic tapestry. Welcome, Rob, to the BoldBrush Show. How are you today?
Great, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you because, as I was mentioning before we started recording, that your work is absolutely gorgeous. I love the colors. I love the vibe. They are so dreamy and so cosmic. Oh, I could stare at them for hours. And also the effects, the brushwork, everything. Absolutely delicious.
Thank you.
You're
Very
welcome.
nice to hear.
Yes. And it's very nice to see. So thank you for that.
Mhm.
So
Sure.
before we dive into your amazing, gorgeous work, do you mind telling us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I paint narrative scenes with allegorical figures that represent aspects of science and space. I call it my Cosmic Perspective series. And it's so I use these allegorical figures to try to make images that help people feel a meaningful connection to the universe and the natural world. Because I feel that nature and science can provide not only a lot of the awe and wonder that we're used to thinking of with science, but also a lot of the quote unquote meaning or feelings of connection that people are looking for these days in the absence of religion or even alongside religion. So, for instance, several of my paintings are representations of the concept that we are made of stardust, which is that we know scientifically that only the lightest elements, hydrogen, helium, and a little bit of lithium, were created at the beginning of the universe. And all of the other heavier elements, the oxygen and nitrogen and the carbon that we're made of, had to be forged in the cores of stars, had to be fused. And that's the only place that those elements come from. So those stars, those early stars, had to explode and spread those elements all across the universe, and so that new solar systems like ours could form with those elements and those ingredients for life. So we know that those elements that we're made of were actually once inside of stars because that's the only place that they come from. So we are literally made of stardust, and I think this can help us feel a sense of connection and belonging to the universe that we might not otherwise have felt because sometimes, rightly so, in some ways, when you look at it, the universe, it is vast, but you can feel, and so you might feel small. But when you look out at the stars and you know that uh, our elements came from those stars and we are a part of all of this going on, that we can feel a little bit larger and more, connected to things. So I think that's an example of some of the ways that science can provide some meaningful connection to the world around us. A few other of my paintings are about how we have the same number of neurons in our brain as there are stars in a typical galaxy. It's about 80 to 100 billion. And I draw that connection in the image for a couple of reasons. One is just that those numbers are so large that it's hard for us to comprehend numbers that big. So by comparison, that's kind of how our brains work, is we understand things by comparison. We can compare the galaxy to the brain and kind of get a grasp on that a little bit as much as we can. And then secondly, maybe more importantly, is to help us appreciate the astonishing complexity of biology and the brain and what it takes to experience consciousness as we do. So in that way, it's a little bit of gratitude to the world around us that we can experience what we see, because so much of the universe is non-sentient and doesn't have that ability, but we have evolved over 4 billion years, and thinking about what that means to be human and to have the ability to experience the world around us. Um, so those are a couple of ways that you can have a meaningful connection to the universe around us just by through science and the natural world. And I try to make images because we are a storytelling species and we live our lives by stories in one way or another, that it helps to have these stories around. And I feel that with art, you can have it on your wall and you can remind you on a regular basis that we're made of stardust, and you can feel that connection. So that's sort of what I'm trying to do with it. So
I love it.
yeah,
I love it. And I especially
thank you.
love, yeah, you're welcome. I love a couple things that you mentioned. One of the first ones that stood out to me is that yearning for a connection. And I feel like
Mhm,
today, so many of us, and I don't know what it is. It could be technology, it could be globalization, it could be a lot of reasons that we all feel very, very isolated. Also, I think
mhm,
post-pandemic, especially, we all have this feeling of isolation that remained with us because of the pandemic, in
mhm,
my opinion, where we feel like this strange separateness. There's no real like way to connect with people easily anymore, in my opinion. Like I think it could be technology, and I feel like what you're mentioning is so important because I myself have felt that isolation, and I'm sure many of our listeners as well have felt that internal isolation, lack of connection, and that yearning. And I find it beautiful that your work, which I would also say is made of stardust, is reaching out and connecting to people as well.
True, made of elements that are heavier than hydrogen and helium. So yeah, it's made of stardust.
Exactly. It started somewhere, which is so cool that, everything is recycled that way. Like sometimes I think about how like
Uh-huh.
the water I drink today might have been inside of a dinosaur at one
Mhm.
point. Or it might have been
Absolutely. Yeah.
floating in the universe somewhere.
Hmm.
And I love that you mentioned that it's very hard to fathom that.
Hmm.
Because our existence is barely 1%, right, of everything that's ever happened in the universe so far. So it's really
Yeah.
it's very mind-bending, and it can be very challenging for people to, I guess, hold that immense thought in their brain, because
Hmm.
it's so unfathomable.
Yeah, one comparison that
Mhm.
I love, for fathoming the history of time. If you take the history of the universe as your arm span, you spread out your
Mhm.
arms, and then the length of time that humanity has existed could be removed from the tip of your fingernail with a single swipe of a nail file.
Wow.
So that's how long we've been around,
Yeah.
uh,
And
and not
again,
just us, but our species.
yeah, that's
So.
insane. That is insane. Yeah, and the time you even spend on Earth, which is barely 100 years in most cases for most people, that's nothing. It's nothing.
Hmm. Yeah.
So of course it's very challenging, and I love that your goal with your work is to tell those stories, right? Because like you said, we're a very narrative creature. We live through
Hmm.
stories, and what I discovered recently also is that when someone's reading a story or reading a book or even seeing a picture of someone doing something, right? They oftentimes, the parts of their brain where they themselves are doing that action in real life light up, right? So if I read someone reading
Hmm.
drinking a coffee or smelling it, my olfactory senses in my brain are turned on, which is really
Yep.
interesting.
Yeah,
Which
it's really neat.
yeah, yeah, and I love that
Hmm.
narrative side of your work as well.
Thank you.
Which actually, this is all very grand, and it makes me wonder, when did you begin your path of the artist, and how did it lead into this scientific narrative journey for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I started, getting interested in art in high school and followed that into art school. And I always found mythology very interesting. So I sort of followed that path and just I had an interest in it, and then one of my teachers in college showed me got introduced me to Joseph Campbell and his way of interpreting mythology, and that I found very interesting and kind of meaningful. And then I kept reading after college, and I got into the works of Carl Sagan, astronomer Carl Sagan, and his really elegant way of talking about the universe. And he is known for popularizing the idea that we're made of stardust. It's an idea that's been around for a while, but he spoke about it a lot. He's known for his Cosmos series that came out in the 70s. It was a TV series, and recently, in the last 5 years or so, Neil deGrasse Tyson continued it. Um, but it's a great series, and he's done a lot of great writing. So that really got me thinking about how meaningful science and the universe can be to us in the natural world as a narrative storytelling vehicle. So um, it took me a while to figure out how I could make art about it because they're such lofty concepts. That was really a struggle for a while. And so I went to school for illustration, and one of the things that I felt like they really drilled into me, which was that the idea with illustration is you should be able to tell your whole story in the image. You shouldn't need to write anything with it. And so I was really trying to figure out how to do that. And eventually, I just realized that maybe I could do it, but if I did, it would look like a political cartoon. It would be too much telling in the image. That's the only way to get some of these concepts into an image, but I still wanted them to be beautiful and evocative and not just be hitting you over the head with things. So I eventually realized I need to write stuff with these. There has to be some writing and there has to be some storytelling, and that's fine. And so when I allowed that to happen, then I started figuring out, more easily how I could paint about this stuff. So, and I think that was really helpful. And it also, as the years went on and social media became, it matured, I guess you could say. And people started saying like, oh yeah, you should be writing things with your art anyway to get people interested in it. Like, it made me think, well, okay, yeah, it's fine. I'm doing these writings, but it's also funny because I started doing this writing as a way to explain my paintings and not as a marketing trying to sell them, but that's just how I came about it. So yeah,
Wow.
but
Wow. That's awesome. And I think the interesting part too is how your journey led to this, right? It's very organic that you settled into
mm,
this Carl Sagan, Joseph Campbell, trying to reach beyond with the tools you got from illustration, right? I really love that illustration does have this show don't tell kind of
mhm,
mentality. Of course, with your like I guess your concepts, it can be very challenging to have them come across
mhm.
because they are so unfathomable in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
yeah. How do you talk about the scale of
Unfathomable.
the universe
Yeah.
in a picture plane this big?
Yeah.
So
5 by 8. It's not easy. So you're
yeah.
tackling something very challenging, which is really cool because I'm sure once you finish a piece, it must feel very satisfying in a lot of ways. Um,
Mhm.
and actually
Yeah.
that did make me want to ask, about your process. How does that
Mhm.
process happen for you? Because I think I read in your website that oftentimes it's very challenging for you to, come up with like go from concept into image because it is
Mhm.
so complex and it is the show don't tell type of
Mhm.
perspective. What's your process like from idea to final piece?
Yeah, for ideas, kind of like how I said, it could get too instructive, too much hitting you over the head with things. I do have a tendency to do that. If I set out with a concept that I want to talk about this specifically, then I'll end up putting too much in it, and it can be that.
Mhm.
So I do find it helpful to just kind of start with imagery that I find beautiful and uh, interesting. Also, with space, space is pretty empty. So, in some ways, it can be a struggle to find things that are really visually appealing. There are things that are visually appealing, but there's a lot of empty space in between. And if you're being really literal with it, you could say, well, oh, there be maybe that little thing would be interesting, but you'd have so much empty space around it. But you can kind of cram more things in just to make it an interesting image. Um, but I'm not sure I remember where I was going with that. But in any case, so I try to make an interesting image first, and then I kind of figure out what it's about. And I have all these concepts that in my mind that I want to talk about. So I usually find something that kind of fits with it, and that I find makes a better image than if I try to say it all at the beginning. So yeah, so that in terms of concept, I kind of explore uh, very openly the way that I want what's going to be in the image, and I sketch and do thumbnail sketches, and then work up a larger sketch when I've got an idea that I think is working. And so then these days I'll usually do a digital sketch. And oh, I've got an iPad, so I usually just work on that. And then um, from there, I do like to do a traditional study if I have time. And so I do a small painting because a lot of my work is dependent on brushwork, and I like to work out some of that brushwork in a small scale first because I feel like you can be a little bit more there's a little bit more bravado in a tiny painting because you've got even small brushes on a small surface can be big brush strokes, and so um, gives you the opportunity to kind of try some things on a small scale, and then when you see that they're working and I move to the larger painting, then I can say, oh, it looks good in the small one, so yeah, I'll just like throw that big brush work in there, and I don't have to worry about it as much. So that's kind of helpful. I like doing those studies. I do a lot of preliminary work, and which is what slows me down. I am not a real fast painter, but that's one of my struggles. But I think it's important to get that preliminary work in there and get it right. So that's what I do. And in some ways, um, I have made it difficult for myself in that way that because I really like alla prima looking paintings. I like a single layer. And so that has made things difficult for me because on the larger scale paintings, it's really hard to get all of that in a single layer. And I have come up with a process that works for me, and it's a little bit convoluted, and I don't really recommend it, but it's what I do because I like that look. And so I do the small studies to tell me what the full image is going to look like when I'm done. I do all those studies so that I know how it's all going to fit together. But when I do the final painting, I work section by section, which is typically a big no-no. And that's that's why I tell people I don't really recommend it. But I will start saying, one corner and work around the picture plane so that each section I can work to completion while it's wet. And then I work a section adjacent to that so I can sort of work the wet edge of the last one, keep going around and do as much wet into wet as possible. I also use clove oil in my paint to keep it wet longer, and that is really helpful. But yeah, so it's not the way that you're typically told to make a painting, but it's the way that I found it works to get the look that I want. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think that wet into wet effect that you have in your work really lends into that mystical sort of look that it has because it's very, I think the effect that it produces is very organic. It's very flowy, which I feel like what you're putting through in your work is very much about flow and that organic
Hmm.
side of things. So I think it's a great thing that you work like that to maintain that effect. I know it's hard, but I think working piecemeal, the way that you're doing, and with long like slow drying oils, that is so useful and very smart. And I mean, in any
Hmm.
case, you already figured it out in the small one. I think it would be really challenging if you went ahead and did the big one without having those puzzle pieces already arranged and organized and set.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For me, at least, it doesn't work out, which is why I do the studies because I need those to work from. For
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, maybe somebody could do it, but I need those studies to know how it's going to work out together,
Yeah,
how all fit together.
yeah. And it's so funny that you have that as a process because that's very scientific. It's
Yeah,
very like,
maybe.
let's start at a small scale and then we can do it in a big scale. Let's
Uh-huh.
test it.
Yeah,
Literally, like,
test it out
the
first.
scientific method. Yeah. Yeah. Which is,
Yeah.
I mean, it's there for a reason. It's useful. And we naturally do
Hmm.
the scientific method anyway. So
Hmm.
it works out. It's very meta that it's like the scientific method of scientific representations, which is great. And actually, I'm
Yeah.
also one of those people who, for a big painting, especially or a larger painting, I think it's just so much more useful to figure out all the little kinks in a smaller piece. And
Hmm.
then maybe when you get to the big piece and you realize, hey, when I changed my mind about one thing, you can still do it because you still have this
Hmm.
entire guide that you've created for yourself. You've done your little practice run. You don't go into, in my opinion, an Olympian doesn't, run a marathon without months and months of training before, right? So I feel like with
Right.
studies, it's a little bit like that, which is
Right.
really
Yeah, and not
useful.
everything gets worked out.
Yep.
It can be an iterative process. Yeah, with each study, I improve bits of it, so that is also
Mhm,
helpful. Yeah.
exactly. And then so the image that you get in your head, does it just pop up, or do you have a concept and then it starts building itself, or do you also look at like maybe take pictures as reference? Like how does that side work?
Oh yeah, reference is a part of it too. But I tend to wait on the reference until I know what it is I want to paint because I don't want the reference to rule the painting too much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so sometimes I will take a reference photo and work it into becoming a painting, but as much as I can, I like to uh, come up with the idea first. And yeah, so I kind of I found it helpful to sort of daydream on my ideas and sort of let my brain take over the dreamy quality of coming up with a scene. If if I if otherwise it can be too I don't know I don't know the words for it, but uh, things come out and flowy and dreamlike when you let your brain do that sort of daydream and
Yeah.
come up with the things that look interesting. Um,
Mm.
so I do find that helpful, and I like I said earlier, I usually let the concepts develop slowly along with them, because I have lots of ideas that I want to paint about in my head, and usually what I end up developing fits into one of those ideas and works to kind of go along with it. Not all the time, but often. So that is usually helpful. Well, although I'm getting to a point now where I've done a lot of the ideas that I had, and now I have the ones that are maybe haven't come as naturally or maybe a little bit more difficult to. So I'm um, probably going to do a little bit more in the near future where I'm uh, working on a specific idea rather than letting it flow naturally. But that's I do both, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's
for
cool.
instance, like this painting here is
Mhm.
I intend to paint two more that are that's the first of a triptych that's I'm planning to make the history of the universe. So that's a very specific idea, and it's not just going to flow out of anything I create. So
Mhm.
um, that's that's the plan for the future.
Oh, that is so cool. And honestly, the moment you said triptych, I'm all in. I love triptychs. I think they're so gorgeous. And also that triptychs were used to storytell as well, right? They were used
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
express like this is what happened here and then this happened and then this happened type of
Hmm.
visual storytelling. So I think it's perfect. It's very perfect. Oh, and I can't wait to see the frame you're gonna use because that's gonna add honestly, like I all of these little details I think are things that add to the story, right? So
Hmm.
yeah, it's gonna be amazing. I can't wait to see that. I'm gonna be stalking you on Instagram just to make sure
Great.
I don't miss
Thanks.
it because it's gonna be amazing. Yeah, and then I also wanted to ask because your work is very one of the things actually that I mentioned before is your work looks very digital, which I know it isn't. When I
Mm,
first saw it, I was like, "Oh my God, is this an oil painting?" And then when I saw your YouTube videos where you were showing the process, I was so taken aback. I was like, "How is he doing that? Like this is magic."
mm,
And it also makes me wonder because you did study illustration and you did mention that you did a little bit of like working digitally, but you don't, which I find is interesting because it makes me wonder what some of your other influences may have been in terms of painting.
mm,
Like, do you have painters that have
mm,
influenced you, or people you look at when you paint?
mhm. Yeah, I do get that sometimes from the that my work can look digital, but it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
I do studies digitally, but like I said, but I don't. Um, I haven't brought a painting to finish in digital in a very long time, so I do all oil, and I do find digital helpful for trying things out. I think it's great for that. You know, you can change the colors really quickly, and that's why I do my sketches digitally because you can experiment a lot really, really quickly in digital. But I do like oil so much that I stick with that. So, but I do look at both digital and traditional artists for inspiration, and there's so many inspirations. But I'd say some of my bigger ones. I studied with an illustrator named John Foster in college, and he was really helpful, and I learned some good painting technique from him. And he's done some great Star Wars novel covers, things like that, that were really inspiring to me. And then for maybe all artists, the ones I usually talk about first are John William Waterhouse, Alphonse Mucha, and then another illustrator from the 90s, Jeffrey Catherine Jones, are all some of my favorites. All very, I think, especially Mucha, flowy work. I do like to create compositions that flow nicely. That is a big part of things for me. So, and I love all that work and all that the brush work in Jeffrey Catherine Jones and John Foster and John Singer Sargent, and all of those brushy works, and I love the narrative of John William Waterhouse. So yeah, all of those, and there's so many more. I have a folder on my computer of uh, tens of thousands of images. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, I you picked very good ones too, to, as like the forerunners to represent your influences, because Muka is he is such a master of design, and
Hmm.
also the he makes it look so organic despite it
Hmm.
being quite planned out, which but he makes it look so effortless that I can see why
Yeah.
you would look at him as a reference, because he is just delicious also
Hmm.
in terms of his designs,
Yeah.
and the flow, a lot of flow. I feel like
Uh-huh.
that's the word that best represents your work, is flow and organic flow. Love it.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then actually I did want to ask you, because you've always been in the arts, you've been in illustration. Um, did you have a moment where you jumped into this career full time, or has it always been like that?
Yeah, I didn't get into it full time because I came out of art school. I could tell that at that time my portfolio was not really quite at a professional level yet, and so I knew I needed more time to improve. And so I took that time. I got a part-time job at a frame shop, and I worked there for about 5 to 7 years, I'd say, while I transitioned to becoming a full-time artist. And that I think that was ultimately a good choice because I came out of art school and I didn't want to be carrying around this portfolio of work that just wasn't up to snuff. I wanted it to be, I wanted to feel confident about the work that I was showing around and trying to get illustration work with. So I did that. I spent a lot of time learning after school because I did not get everything I felt like I needed from school, and did a lot of learning on my own afterwards, and developed and eventually started getting the work that I was looking for, which actually I never really made the transition to pursuing that work very well. I think it did. So there are ups and downs. Coming out of school and saying I'm going to work on my portfolio got me to improve, which was great. But it also put me in this mindset of improving rather than promoting. And so the work maybe came more slowly than it could have, um, but it also allowed me to develop my personal work in a way that might not have happened if I had just jumped into illustration as a career and just done that. Um, so there's ups and downs to it, but that's kind of how I went with it. But I started getting some jobs slowly, and eventually it became enough to go full time art. And always, and the entire time it was both fine art and illustration. So
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah. At BoldBrush, we inspire artists to inspire the world because creating art creates magic, and the world is currently in desperate need of magic. BoldBrush provides artists with free art marketing, creativity, and business ideas and information. This show is an example. We also offer written resources, articles, and a free monthly art contest open to all visual artists. We believe that fortune favors the bold brush. And if you believe that too, sign up completely free at boldbrushshow.com. That's BoldBrush show.com. The BoldBrush Show is sponsored by Faso. Now more than ever, it's crucial to have a website when you're an artist, especially if you want to be a professional in your career. Thankfully, with our special link, faso.com/podcast, you can make that come true and also get over 50% off your first year on your artist website. Yes, that's basically the price of 12 lattes in 1 year, which I think is a really great deal considering that you get sleek and beautiful website templates that are also mobile friendly, e commerce, print on demand in certain countries, as well as access to our marketing center that has our brand new art marketing calendar. And the art marketing calendar is something that you won't get with our competitor. The art marketing calendar gives you day by day, step by step guides on what you should be doing today, right now, in order to get your artwork out there and seen by the right eyes so that you can make more sales this year. So, if you want to change your life and actually meet your sales goal this year, then start now by going to our special link, faso.com/podcast. That's faso.com/podcast. It's really good that you were working on both because sometimes you might hear some people who say, "Oh, don't do your like make sure your job isn't like what you do on the side as a painter, right? Don't have a job that's like
Mhm.
arts related." But I've actually had other illustrators like you who mentioned like, "Oh yeah, I did my illustration on over here and that led me to practice more for what I was doing over there." So they can feed
Mhm.
into each other. I think some people maybe
Yeah.
just feel like they might burn out. But if you can handle it, I like you did, I think it's brilliant. Um and
Yeah.
what would you say was one of the biggest challenges that you faced when you made that jump?
Hmm. Um, hmm. Well, you never know if it's gonna be enough, really, when you're making that transition, unless things are going great. But for me, it was slow, so it was hard to know for sure if it was going to be enough to survive to live on. But I managed to make it work, and it was nice that I had the part-time frame shop job that I had was nice in that I could sort of taper off on it. I didn't have to quit hard. I could for a
Mm.
while. I was still working there with shorter hours and still had my frame discount, and
Oh,
it
nice.
was helpful. So
Yeah, yeah, because frames can be expensive. So
yeah, yeah, they
yeah,
can.
yeah, but
So,
that's awesome too that you mentioned, tapering instead of just clean cut. Because for some people, clean cut
mhm,
works. For other people, maybe tapering might be a little bit better since you never know the economic situation. And of course, we've had guests who have also mentioned, living below your means. So there's a lot that goes
mhm,
into it that's
yeah,
very can be very scary. But once
mhm.
you're like at that moment, like what was the moment where you were just like sitting and you were like, oh my God, I'm doing this full time. I'm an artist. Like this is it.
Hmm. I don't know. I'm pretty slow and thoughtful about things. So I'm not sure there was a moment exactly, but or at least not that I remember. But I think there were several moments probably where I was thinking, yeah, all right, I'm gonna do it. And then, a month later, I was like, well, okay, I'll still pick up a few hours at the frame shop. And then, there's another moment where you're like, all right, I'm gonna do it. And then, eventually it actually happens. But so it was a slow process. It's okay. It
Yeah.
was good. you mentioned living below your means, and that is also something I definitely did a lot of. I uh, lived as cheaply as I could to so that I didn't need, a full-time job to support myself. That was a big part of my plan. So, um, yeah, it because if you're working a full-time job, it's really hard to put in the hours after that to improve your portfolio and get your work where it needs to be. So that was part of it. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, because full-time job can be so taxing on your energy and your
Mhm.
creativity too. I feel
Yeah.
like when I've interviewed guests who have had full-time jobs, which oh my gosh, I admire them. They always mention how they were just sleeping less and doing as much as they could. And if maybe some of our listeners have a temperament of I don't have that much energy, they can take your route, which is live
Mhm.
as below your means as you can and
Yeah.
have that
Which isn't
side
easy
part-time
either.
job. No, it's not. It's definitely not. But at least you
Yeah.
can you can rest a little bit more and have more time
Yeah.
to develop that creative side, which I love that you mentioned that giving yourself that time to really allow your voice to start showing through, like um giving yourself that time and that grace period of I want to figure myself out, I want to figure out what I want to do, and also develop
Mhm.
more technique. I think that's something else that is very helpful for some people. And it takes the time that it takes. How long did it more or less take you to really, I guess, flow into that voice of yours? How, like, after school?
To develop my personal work, the
Yeah.
cosmic perspective thing. Um, hmm. Well, I guess it was getting close to 10 years, maybe 7 to 8 years. And actually, now that you say it, I think it probably did have to do with also my transition out of the part-time job. Also, is
Mm.
that I started to feel like I had something I wanted to paint about. For a long time, I just felt like, oh, I'm making images for my portfolio, just something that looks good to go in the portfolio and get some work or whatever. But when I started coming up with these cosmic perspective ideas, that was really a point where I was like, oh, I've got something I want to talk about now. I've got something I want to paint about. And now I've got the drive to create something that, isn't just something pretty to look at, but, has some meaning to me at least. So,
It's
yeah.
so interesting. Yeah, because obviously, every guest I've come to the same conclusion with many guests, which is paint what you love, right? Which
Mhm.
it seems like what you arrived at, right, is very different from I instinctively already know what I love. It became more of like this is what arose for you, right? The
Mhm.
galaxies, the cosmic side, the
Mhm.
narrative. So it's interesting to see that perspective of someone who through their own personal exploration reached a very different avenue or a very different I guess love, right? Different passion that if you
Yeah.
didn't have that time to reflect, maybe you might not have reached it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely came to a point where space and science and the natural world were becoming very meaningful to me, and it was a struggle to figure out how to put it into a painting because they're very, as I said before, large concepts and big
Yeah.
ideas. So how do you encapsulate that into a painting, an image? And it took a while to do that. So
Yeah. Yeah. And then from that, I actually wanted to ask you too, because obviously your work has reached a very beautiful crescendo and it's continued. How have you used narrative also in the marketing side of your work?
mhm. Yeah, well, so do have little stories that I post with all of the paintings. And, like I said, that kind of developed from wanting to talk about these big concepts. And so that has come a little bit more naturally to me than maybe it would come for some other people who maybe if you arrived at a set of images, a set of paintings, and didn't have a whole lot extra to say about them, might be harder. But for me, it was that's what I wanted to do was tell people about them. So it kind of grew very naturally to explain the deeper concepts about space and perspective of cosmic perspective, and stardust, um, and I've also, tried to incorporate other ideas about things that psychologically are helpful and meaningful to us, because I do feel like science can fulfill those human needs that we have, or the natural world through science. Um, so, looked into positive psychology, and gratitude, for instance, is a really important thing for us psychologically. And so it's good to incorporate things that help us feel gratitude. And it doesn't have to be gratitude towards any person or anything, but just for the fact that we can experience the universe, or that, one of my other paintings is called the magnetosphere. And it's about just having gratitude for something that we kind of take for granted most of the time, which is that our Earth has a magnetosphere, a magnetic bubble around it, basically created by the moving core. And this protects us from the solar radiation that would otherwise make it very difficult for life to exist on Earth. If we didn't have that magnetosphere, our atmosphere would get blown away by the solar wind, and our planet would look a lot more like Mars, probably. So it would be much harder for life to exist, and we can just have some gratitude that we have that magnetosphere and we can be here. So I think, that I try to incorporate things like that, and as well as more of the scientific points, like how we're made of stardust. And yeah,
Mm.
I'm always looking for more angles on ways to feel that meaningful connection to the natural world, and that's some of the ways that I've found. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and that really, wow, that really made me realize how how much of an anomaly we are. And how
Yeah, in a
incredible
lot
it
of ways.
is. Yeah, how incredible it is that we can even be conscious, right? And experience
Yeah.
all of this, like you said. Oof, that's a big one.
Yeah, and
Um,
having that gratitude is really helpful psychologically too,
it
to
is
just sit back and say, like, it's just awesome that I can experience this at all. That I'm not just a rock sitting on the ground.
yeah,
I am a part of the universe that has become conscious and can now look out and experience the rest of the universe. And that's, I think, amazing. So,
incredible.
um,
Incredible. Um, how have you, because I obviously had a very positive response because I'm like, I feel like I'm your ideal audience, but also how have you found that that your audience on Instagram or social media or other platforms, how have you found that they have responded to your narrative side
hmm.
of your marketing? Has it been positive?
Oh, it's positive, but because I do feel like my work takes a little bit of explaining, uh, it is slow.
Mm,
It's not. I just don't put my work out there and all of a sudden have a huge audience.
right.
When I go to conventions and I am displaying and I'm talking to people, people will often come up and say, like, "Oh, this is nice work," and then I talk about it and explain it, and then they say, "Oh, now I feel it. Now I love it," and that's
Yeah.
so it kind of builds slowly, and people have
Mm,
to, I think, sort of get into it a little bit before they really get into it.
mm,
So that's been a
mm.
struggle, I think, from the beginning for my work, that it takes a little time for people to warm up to it. And but when they do, they tend to really get into it. So I think that's great. But it hasn't it's not a story that we have out there a whole lot yet.
Mhm.
And that's kind of I guess the struggle is that a lot of illustrators I know paint things that, there's already stories about. They can paint Lord of the Rings, or other stories that people already know, and immediately people, know what that painting is about, and they love it because they love that character.
Yeah.
Whereas with me, they may not already know the story of how we have the same number of neurons in our brain as there are stars in a typical galaxy. So that takes a little bit of explaining, and it's sort of a slow burn. But I find it meaningful, and I think a lot of other people too, once they get a grasp of what it is, that they find it really meaningful too. Um, so it's not all been easy. It's a little bit of a struggle to get my message out there, but it's very rewarding, I'd say, to see the way people connect with it. So
Yeah.
even if it's not explosive and quick.
Oh, no, of course not. Yeah, I think what matters too is that the people who do love it, like they react. like in a profound way to your work, right? Because it is very profound,
Mhm.
and I agree that the struggle with the neo narrative of life and everything that you're creating is
Mhm.
precisely that it is new, right? It is
Mhm.
you're trying, and this is what we were talking about earlier as well. You're trying to create this sort of like every consciousness instead of every man, every consciousness, right? Like which
Mhm.
encompasses the everything and the all, and that is a very challenging thing to reach for, and it's awesome that you're attempting it because
Yeah.
someone out there has to. Um,
Mhm.
so it's wow, I commend you greatly.
Thank
You're welcome.
you.
And also I
Thank
did see
you.
that you do have multiple platforms. And
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you because we were talking a little bit about the income side of things and how it can be a challenge. What have been your preferred streams of income for to be able to live as an artist?
Yeah, it has been varied. I have done teaching. I've done fine art. I've done illustration. Sold prints, sold originals, and there have been many years where I've asked myself that question. And I've looked back at my income sheet and and added things up and like, oh well, what was the main thing this year? And oftentimes there wasn't one. It was just all put together with a bunch of different things.
Mm.
So yeah, it really helps to diversify. Um, and I've done a lot of different things. I can't say that one thing was really what has been my bread and butter, you'd say, but I've done a lot of things and they all kind of fit together and make it work. So these days I'm focusing on my personal work, and I've been working for Wizards of the Coast for illustration, doing illustration for Magic the Gathering, the card game,
Oh, that's so
and that
cool.
uh, so that's been good lately. Yeah, I'm hoping to do more of that if AI doesn't take over and take over all the illustration jobs. We'll see, but
Oh, I hope not.
so far they're still hiring illustrators, and it's been that's that's a pretty good income stream for part of it. And interestingly, not particularly the pay from the company, but the fact that there's a pretty good collector base for Magic the Gathering. So it's actually kind of fine art too, in that
Hmm.
the I'm making more selling the original paintings to collectors of the game than I am making the art for the game. And that's interesting. But again, multiple income streams, and that's one of the reasons that I'm working for that game over other games right now.
Right.
And so that's one thing about income streams. But it's all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I go to a convention or two a year usually and sell prints at those, and hopefully an original here or there, and that's helpful. Selling online, it's kind of slow trickle, but when you go to a convention for that's good for selling prints, I can uh, sell a whole lot more prints in a weekend than I would sell in the year online. So that's one way to do it, and that makes traveling to those conventions useful. So and it's always great to be there and talk to people about my work. Like I said, those are the places where I get to talk to people about it more, and where I see those interactions where people really uh, get pulled in and really like it. So it's rewarding too. Yeah,
Yeah.
but so yeah, lots of different income streams. I haven't been teaching for a while. I find that a whole nother side of things that is great to do, but is can slow down my other work a lot if I spend too much time doing it. So I kind of try to focus on my work, and then here and there, sometimes I do a workshop. It's not real common for me. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really cool because it goes to show that there's kind of like a bit of a season for things, right? Right now you're in your season of I'm not teaching, I'm working. And then maybe you'll go
mhm,
back into the teaching season once you feel like, oh well, I think I could totally benefit from teaching right now. But that goes to show that
yeah.
even the career of an artist is very organic, right?
Mhm,
There's no promise that the plants are going to grow tomorrow and you're going to have your tomatoes, right? But
Mhm.
maybe next year, or like it's just much more natural in my opinion. It's much more
Yeah.
organic, like I said. And then the other thing that you mentioned that really went full circle was how talking to people at these conventions and telling them about your work, it creates that connection, which is something that we were talking about in
Mhm.
the beginning, that yearning for
Mhm.
connection that we all have instinctively, from birth. We're looking for our parents to make that connection to tell us, hey, we exist, which is
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's really rewarding to talk to people about the work and see them get
Mhm.
into it. So yeah,
Yes.
it's been good.
Yeah, you see a little glimmer in their eye, like, oh,
Mm.
it's so
Yeah, yeah,
cool.
I do get to see that because there's a lot of artwork at some of these conventions, and they kind of get
Mhm.
a little glaze as they're walking
Close-sided.
around, and they're like, okay, yeah, okay, this is cool too. And then I tell them about it, and they're like,
Yeah. Like
so,
wakes them up again a little bit. Yeah, it can be very
yeah,
overwhelming to see so much work at
yeah,
conventions. And then the other cool thing, I love that you're doing stuff for Magic the Gathering. I feel like the
mhm,
honestly the artwork on their cards, the illustrations are absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous. So I love
yeah,
that,
it's
you have
great
found
work.
a collector base. Yeah, you found a collector base through there. And
Hmm.
um that is so cool. And they pay really well, like the collectors themselves to get the original because that's such a big deal
Hmm.
for them. It's like, oh, you see this original? Yeah, it's from this card over here that you
Hmm.
guys all have, but I
Yeah,
got the original. That is so cool.
it's interesting, and like I suppose any sort of market, there's its own little quirks to it because it's so
Mhm.
connected to the game. Well,
Yep.
a lot of the time, the price of what a painting will sell for depends on how good the card is. So, which is, not something that you're used to in the art world,
It is so cool.
yeah, it's a whole nother way of looking at things. You might
Mhm.
put a whole lot of work into this painting that is for a very common card, and then
Mm.
people are like, oh, but it's a common card. And then some
Oh my
painting
god.
that is maybe it was easier, but goes on a more important card. People are paying a lot of money for that. So it's a market all its own that is different. So
It's so cool. That is so cool.
yeah.
Oh, it goes to show, artists can definitely grow in many unexpected places and in very unexpected ways. Um, like you could work, on illustrations for Magic the Gathering or just sell directly to collectors, work with a gallery. Like there are so many options out there. And I love that you mentioned
Mhm.
your streams of income because yeah, there's so many opportunities out there that we don't know about. Um,
Mhm.
and actually, I did want to ask you, what advice would you give to someone who wants to become a full-time artist?
Oh, that is a tough question these days, especially with AI coming out, because the future is so unknown right now
Mhm.
for art. But hoping that people continue to make art and it doesn't all just become made by machines. Uh, I think a lot of the things that we touched on already, I think, are some of the things that really helped me. It was, getting a part-time job so that I still had the energy to work on my work and living below my means in a way that allowed me to put more time into my work. Or those were the things that I think I very consciously set out to do and allowed me to get where I am. Because I have seen a lot of other people who graduated from art school and ran into difficulties of, they got the full-time job and then just couldn't find the time to keep working on their art or unfortunately, the realities sometimes are like they had a health condition that required more money and couldn't live below their means, which is really unfortunate that that's, a problem, but that can be a problem. And so I've been really fortunate to be able to follow the path I have. And yeah, so, but those are the things that allowed me to get where I am, I think. I would say, I guess, for advice also to paint what you love, as we mentioned, follow your passions because that's what's going to keep you working. You're going to keep working if you like what you're doing, and that's important. So it took me a long time to figure out how to work what I what I was interested into art, but there's a way. So there's a way.
Yes. Yes. That's great. That's great. And yeah, those are all very valid points. It's not an easy career. Of course, it is a lot easier, like you said, if you're painting what you love. Or,
Hmm.
allowing yourself to have that I guess that exploration phase to even reach it
Hmm.
like you did. And I find that you've reached a very fruitful I guess like realm for yourself, right? Of things that you very clearly enjoy, you're very clearly passionate about. And I
Hmm.
think that in itself is very inspiring. And I hope it's inspiring to our listeners to really go out there and maybe read about, I don't know, the crazy stuff that you like. And then you never know, you might read a line in a book that really changes your world. Kind of like, with you
Yeah.
and Joseph Campbell and Carl Sagan. Um,
Yep.
so
Yep.
yeah. And then I do know that you have a Patreon as well.
Mhm.
Is there any specific like I guess preferred social media or preferred site that you like to send your listeners to?
Well, I try to be on everything so that I'm available to whatever people prefer. Everybody has their preferences. So if somebody
Mhm.
spends all their time on one, I want to be able available there. So I do try to put my work up on everything. But personally, I like longer format things where I can write the things that I write with the paintings, and I don't have to truncate them. Places like Twitter, for example, I always have to cut it down to one sentence or something, and then
Mm.
I find that unfortunate. So I like, Facebook and Instagram are great for being able to write out enough, and Patreon is probably the best way to interact with my work because it's all there, and I try to post there first. I've got a newsletter on my website, and so yeah, they're all good means, but uh, yeah. So I put the information out everywhere. I have the writing everywhere, so you can experience them with that, and follow along however you like to best.
Perfect. Yeah. And what is your website?
My website is robrayart.com. So real simple, and that's
Perfect.
Ray with an E. Rob Ray Art.
Perfect. Awesome. And then I will obviously include all of your links in our show notes so our listeners can go check out your work while they're listening. I highly recommend it. It is so delicious. I keep using that word because I don't know, the colors, the brushstrokes, it's so good.
Thank,
So good. A
thank you.
feast for the eyes. You're welcome. Well, thank you
Great.
so much for being a guest on the show today.
Great. Yeah, it's been great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course.